Well, welcome back, guys, to Pathfinders, and glad that you're here with us today. Tell your friends.
Happy Father's Day, man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yep. Not much planned today. Just going to watch the race,
Woo!
relax, and
That's the best
just chill.
The US Open's on today too, right?
Yeah, the carnage continues, I'm sure. The carnage will continue at Oakmont. It's
Are
been,
you a golf person?
not really. I see clips, but I've heard it's pretty rough there this week. So I'll be watching F1 today, and that's about it. Maybe taking a nap. Who knows? We'll see.
There's just a few people under par.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
Usually they're like 15 under par.
Yeah, I heard I think they lowered like what you had to be in your final round, because normally it's like,
Oh, to make the cut.
yeah, to make the cut. I think they lowered it.
Yeah.
Because so many
Oh,
people
yeah,
were,
yeah.
like, because there was only a few.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough.
Greens are like putting on glass.
Yeah,
They just, they would stop.
yeah. And then the rough's like 3 feet away. So.
Interesting.
But today we are going to continue our discussion on the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has probably his most famous sermon, and a sermon on living a kingdom life. Really, is this sermon is about living a life in the kingdom of God. What does it mean to live like living within a kingdom not of this world, but a kingdom of God, a kingdom of heaven, living a life that's really countercultural. And I think that's what is so important to when we're looking at this sermon. It's about not just ethereal things, but about really living. It's a Christian living sermon. It's about actions. It's about how to live your life. And it's very countercultural. It's really, in many ways, the opposite of what the world will tell you. And it's the opposite of what the sermons of the leaders of the world will say, or the sermons of life experience sometimes will tell you. And it's the world turned upside down. But that's what Jesus preaches. And in our last discussion, we talked about the Beatitudes, the blessings of Jesus. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who seek out righteousness, who are the peacemakers. And we said that, or at least I said, I don't know if you said it, but I was saying that we can look at these blessings both from a face value type of thing, like blessed are those who mourn. Well, mourn in an emotional sense when we lose people, or we lose our dreams or things like that. But also those who mourn in a spiritual sense, when we mourn the brokenness of the world, or we mourn over sin, or we mourn over wickedness. And we see in all those blessings kind of a surface value, face value, but also a more spiritual sense to those things. We also talked about the Old Testament connections to those. But now that Jesus has given us these blessings, and he ended with, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, and blessed are those who are persecuted, especially on the account of following Jesus, and being reviled and persecuted for the account of Jesus' name, and rejoicing in that persecution because the reward will be great in heaven. I didn't mention this because we kind of ran out of time. Our discussion was really rich, I think, at least it was for me. I hope it was for you. Sometimes when we study the Bible, we can take the words of Scripture and use them inappropriately. I think we can all agree that that happens sometimes in our world. There are many famous examples of that. You know, Crusades. Okay, probably the most famous example, especially the third one. But there's lots of examples for that, and probably in your own life, you may have made a mistake of taking a biblical phrase or verse out of context and using it inappropriately, and then realizing only later that it's like, oh, maybe that wasn't what that was talking about, and I made a mistake there. I've seen this verse 11, and we're in Matthew chapter 5, of course, verse 11 and 12. Blessed are those who, when others revile you and persecute you, and rejoice in that, be glad in that, because your reward is great in heaven. Be careful here. Do not seek out persecution. Okay? This is not what Jesus is telling you. That you're not supposed to go out and say, well, you know, if we're supposed to rejoice and be glad in persecution, well, then I should go out and put myself in harm's way and go out and get persecuted for the sake of Jesus, because, hey, that's the way that leads to, you know, great rewards in heaven. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying here. Don't go out and put yourself in harm's way just to go get yourself rewards in heaven. Jesus tells his own disciples when they go on mission to be wise as a serpent and to be careful and cunning to avoid those situations that would put themselves in harm's way. That's what he tells his own disciples, okay? And to be cunning and wise, and don't be foolish. So I just want to put that caveat out there. It kind of seems like, oh, well, if I'm going to go get persecuted, I should go, you know, do that. Let me go put myself on a street corner, you know, in the third ward, or go, you know, to some foreign country where they, you know, I can go get martyred because great will be my reward in heaven. No, that's foolishness, okay? So don't do that. Just realize that if it does happen, then you should just expect that. But don't go seek it out, okay? So, but don't be afraid of it. Okay. Anyway, that's a caveat. Now we're going to move on to some new material today. I want to start with a question, because we're talking about living as salt and light today. Can you think of someone whose quiet example has impacted your life deeply in a spiritual sense? Someone who may not have even realized their impact upon you when they impacted it. Maybe you didn't even realize it at the time, but you look back, and in a spiritual way, in your spiritual walk, you look back and you realize, wow, that person or those people really made an impact upon my walk with Jesus. And they didn't even know it. I didn't even know it. And now I look back and say, whoa, you know, I can, you know, think of a lot of people like that. My confirmation teachers when I was in 6th grade, you know, just doing, you know, volunteering to lead a confirmation class, and what an impact that, you know, it gave to me. Just a married couple that just, you know, their kids were older, and then they said, well, we'll just help these 6th graders out. God love them. that group of boys in that class were, woo, man, we were out of control. But they you know, they're salt and light, you know, and they stuck with it. They didn't give up. They should have, but they didn't. So I'm sure you can think of some examples like that, and that's what we call salt and light, a quiet impact that salts you, that it provides light. That's what Jesus is talking here in Matthew chapter 5, 13 through 16. So let's read that together. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So Jesus here is using these metaphors that people can understand to talk about really deep and important things. So let's talk about salt. These metaphors that he's using have a lot of historical and important cultural import. First of all, salt in the Old Testament. Let's talk about that. They had a lot of rich background to the people he's talking to here on this mountain, the Judean people, who had this background of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which include the book of Leviticus. Leviticus is a book of laws, the laws of all the temple and the offerings and how the people of Judea were going to relate to their God. And one of the ways they related to the God was through these offerings that they would give to God so that they could stay in a right relationship with him, in a state of righteousness. And one of the ways they had to do that was with grain offerings. So throughout the year, they would have to give offerings of the livestock, but also of the grain. And when at the beginning of the harvest, they gave the offerings of the first fruits, of the first grain that they harvested. They had to burn that at the altar. And in Leviticus 2:13, it says that grain offering has to be seasoned with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing. So God gives instructions in the book of Leviticus that the grain offering needs to be salted. It has to be flavored. Because if you've ever eaten oatmeal before, right? You guys have had oatmeal, I assume, right? Okay, if you just eat oats and water, that's not very good, right? I like my oatmeal with a couple pounds of butter and a couple pounds of brown sugar. It's like I think there is some oatmeal in my oatmeal, but not very much of it, right? It's like mostly other stuff with some oats in it. So even God himself doesn't like to have just grain, okay? He's got to have some flavoring in there. So, but that salt, it embodies the flavoring in the covenant faithfulness. And why is that? Because of salt's inherent properties. So what does salt actually do? It's preserves, right? So, in our modern times, we usually use refrigeration for preservation. But in the ancient times, it was salt that did that. Salt pork, and that, well, not for the Judeans, not salt pork, but salt beef, right? So they would salt their beef and their grain, and everything was packed in salt to preserve it and to purify it, but also to flavor it. Because spices were very rare, right? The spice trade. So, spices were worth more than gold sometimes, but salt was plentiful. And so, because especially living next to the Dead Sea, guess what they had a lot of? Salt. Okay, I've never been there before, but I've seen pictures of the Dead Sea. It's just on the salt all over the shore there. So I had lots of salt there. But it equals in the spiritual sense this purity and the preservation of the covenant. It was also part of the temple worship provisions in Ezra. Now, we talked about in our last series as the people came back from exile, right? Ezra was the one who got the temple in Jerusalem back up and running, right? Reestablished the temple worship for the second time when the people came back from exile. And in Ezra, in his book, as he's getting the temple back up and running, he said, okay, what do we need to provision the priests and get the temple back up and running? He says, whatever we need, bulls, rams, sheep for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, oil for the priests in Jerusalem require. Let that be given them day to day by day without fail. So as not only in the ancient times, but as they reestablish the temple, salt is still a part of that provision. And in Job, the oldest book in the Bible, okay, Job's the oldest book of the Bible. Some say it may be the oldest book ever written. Can that be which is tasteless be eaten without salt? Even Job understands, the oldest book said we need salt to survive, right? It's very important. It adds flavor. It makes something that's not worth eating being eaten, okay? And in Jesus' time, salt was extremely valuable. In fact, the word salary comes from the salt because people were paid in salt sometimes. Roman soldiers were paid in salt. That's the word salary comes from being paid in just bags of salt. So, which I didn't know. That's kind of an interesting.
That is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was so just such a valuable commodity. So when Jesus speaks, he speaks to the people in a language they can understand, in metaphors they can understand, talking about preservation. Now, let's talk about light in the Old Testament, because he uses this double metaphor, salt and light. Not one or the other, but both, salt and light, both and. He says, you are the light of the world. Of course, we go back to the very beginning. Genesis 1:3-4, God spoke. His very first act, let there be what? Light. Separating the light from the darkness. That's God's first act, recorded act. Let there be light. In Exodus, the lampstand and the tabernacle was to burn continuously. So as God's people are rescued and redeemed out of slavery from Egypt, God gives Moses this design for his tabernacle of worship and says, okay, I'm going to have this relationship with you, my people whom I've rescued, and I'm going to have this place of worship for you, this tabernacle, which was like the prototype for the temple. And there's going to be this altar, and he gives them exact, specific designs for it, and says there's going to be this lampstand where he says, you shall, God is commanding Moses, you shall command the people of Israel that they bring to you pure beaten olive oil for the light, that a lamp may regularly be set up to burn in the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, outside the veil that is before the testimony. Aaron and his sons shall tend it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever to be observed throughout their generations by the people of Israel. So in this temple of meeting, right outside the Holy of Holies, in the altar was this lampstand, this ever-burning flame, this light that was basically it symbolized God's eternal presence. And it goes all the way back to that first act, let there be light, that God's presence in the universe is basically light out of darkness. And that in the place where he is worshipped and that his presence dwells on earth, that presence is represented by light, and that God is light. And then now Jesus is saying in Matthew, let you be light. We're going to kind of talk about that. So as you think about what Jesus is saying, and we'll get to that, let's look at the Old Testament. God creates light out of darkness. And then he's saying, now when you worship me, in the place you worship, I want light to be there at all times to represent me, because I am the light that comes out of the darkness. And in Isaiah, God tells his servant, and the servant, this idea of the servant in Isaiah, it represents either Israel or the Messiah. He says in Isaiah, I will make you a light for the nations. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations. That's the servant. He's talking about this character of the servant. I will give you as a covenant. I will give you, the servant, as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations. So now that light, which was in the universe out of the darkness, and then the light, where was it? It was in the tabernacle in the temple for whom? The Jews, right? The nation of Israel. And then Isaiah in his prophecy says, well, actually the servant is going to be a covenant, a light for whom? The nations. The nations, not just a nation, not just a people, but for all the nations. Okay, now we have a little bit of a background in the Old Testament. Anybody have any questions about those connections? Remember, Jesus is the greatest Old Testament scholar to ever live, in my opinion. And whenever he speaks, that's his background, and that's the background he's speaking to. You know, we are New Testament people, and so it's sometimes easy to, when Jesus speaks, to connect that to other New Testament things, and we can do that. We can do that for sure. Like when Jesus says something, we say, "Oh, yeah, that's like when Paul says this." But remember that when we say, "Oh, when Jesus says something about the law or something or about grace or freedom," and then later Paul says something about that, well, sure, we need to connect those two, but we need to do it in the right order. That Paul is referencing Jesus' talking, not the other way around, okay? So Paul comes after Jesus, and sometimes it can be confusing. But when Jesus is speaking, all he's referencing to the people is the Old Testament. So the people that are hearing Jesus, all they have to go on is that Old Testament scripture. And so we can reference that Old Testament, and the people certainly would as well too. Especially, you know, they were maybe more educated than we give them credit for sometimes on the Old Testament. So when he's saying salt and light and those things, they certainly could have been drawing these same references that I am today. Now, maybe not. Maybe they would have had their own references, but or their own connections to other things in the Old Testament, or maybe they wouldn't have any references at all, connections. But it certainly is possible that they would be doing, because they had the same Old Testament that we do. Okay.
Well, it is kind of interesting considering current day events. You read, "I will make you a light of the nations," and it's just been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. So. Quite a story.
Yeah, it is. It's ongoing. Yeah. And so, and that's why we look at Isaiah and saying, you know, when it says Israel, we have to be careful there, because Israel means, I believe, in this context, the people that were called Israel at the time of Isaiah, right? And then Jesus comes. And in a theological sense, in my opinion, Jesus is Israel. He is Israel, the embodiment of Israel, the covenant. He is the Lamb, right? So if you look at, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that argue with me on this one, by the way. Okay, so don't take it as like gospel, because I'm not a gospel writer. Okay, but if I look at the book of Isaiah, and he's talking about all these things that are going to happen to Israel, that's the nation of Israel as existed like in 1500, 500
right.
BC.
Not the proper boundaries we know now.
Not the boundary, yeah, exactly. Not the political state that was created in the 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Israel that was the 12 tribes of Israel that existed at that time. A cultural, religious and hereditary genetic, race or whatever tribal really is what it was, and monarchy. Davidic monarchy. And then Jesus, but then they go to exile, they come back, they're all spread out. And then Jesus comes along, and I think when you read it in the context of Jesus, then Jesus becomes the focal point. And Jesus really is that Israel. And all the things that happen to, or they're supposed to happen to Israel, do happen to Israel, actually happen to Jesus. And Jesus is that embodiment. And so Israel is the light to all the nations. They're the shining city on the hill. They're the Zion. And because they show the nations how to act. And they're called out. And they're placed on the hill. But so is Jesus. And he's the perfect Israel. He's the perfect shining city on the hill. So if you read in that context, everything has happened that needs to happen. And so if you're thinking about all these prophecies and stuff that are going to happen to the modern state of Israel, it's like, yeah, but all that stuff's already happened because Jesus was already here. But now, again, a lot of people are going to argue with me on that one. And they have some good arguments as well, too. I'm not going to say that, I couldn't be wrong. I might be wrong. But I would be careful when saying, Israel, when it says Israel in the book, is talking about the modern state of Israel. Just because two things have the same name doesn't mean they're the same thing.
Okay, yeah.
But they could be. I could be wrong. Okay, so, yeah. But it's good food for thought, and it's good to be considering those things. And again, I could most certainly be on the wrong track on that one, but that's just what I think. Okay, don't take my word for it. Do your research. And come at me if you think I'm wrong.
Well, it's kind of like Israel just represents a lot.
It does represent a lot, yes. And remember, sometimes there's that surface level thing, and then there's maybe something below it too, and then maybe something below that too, especially in Isaiah. Especially when you're dealing with prophecy. And again, that's why I'm really, trying to hedge my bets here, because when it comes to prophecy, you never know what it really means until it's happened. And so we know we may be 1,000 years away from something that's going to happen, or maybe 10 days away from it, or it may have happened we haven't really seen, or it may be happening today. And so it may be hard to decipher until it's happened. That's just the tough thing with prophecy. So that's why I'm really trying to dissemble here, which I know is very frustrating for you. But I got to, so I'm gonna look like an idiot. Okay, so let's look at now. You are the salt of the earth. It's a purifier, preservative, and a sign of covenant. We know that, right? And Jesus is the new covenant. He's saying, that's what he's starting to say, is that when he starts talking about covenant things, and he is starting to say he is a new covenant, he's beginning that process here. He's talking about a new kingdom, right? A new kingdom, a kingdom of heaven. He just said that in verse 10. This kingdom of heaven. He said in verse 3 as well, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They shall inherit the earth. Well, who can inherit the earth except those who are heirs to a kingdom? They are going to, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And now he's talking about these covenant things, like this salt that was used for the sign of the covenant. He's echoing this Levitical understanding. Covenant keeping. Losing saltiness equals a compromise. So when he says, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how its saltiness be restored? Well, what is salt good for? For being salty, right? What else is it good for? Doesn't, it's not used for decoration. Okay? I mean, it doesn't really have anything. It's good for being salty.
Except for my Himalayan salt lab.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
There are salt sculptures.
Salt sculptures. Okay. Yeah. A pillar of salt. Okay.
Just kidding.
But yeah. But touche. Okay. Losing saltiness. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it equals compromise, right? A loss of distinctiveness. If you've lost the one thing that makes you distinctive, then what really good are you? And that's what he's saying. You're not good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Remember, when the Judean people lost their distinctiveness, What made them distinct? The worship of the one God, the monogamous relationship with Yahweh. That's what made them distinct. When they lost that, you guys know what happened because you were here, right? We talked about it. What happened? Exile, punishment. They were thrown out and trampled under the feet of Babylon. That's what happened to them. They were no longer good for anything. They were not the shining city. They were literally on a shining city. They were on a hill, Jerusalem, right? The temple with its eternal flame was a shining city on a hill. But when they lost their distinctiveness, because they lost their relationship, their monogamy, they were trampled. And that shining city on the hill was destroyed, and they were trampled under their feet. They lost it. So if that was the monogamous relationship, that quality, the distinctive quality of the Judean people, what is the saltiness of the Christian today? What is that distinctive quality that you think that Jesus is talking about here? Well, we don't really have to guess, because if you take Matthew 13 through 16 by itself, you might have to guess, right? And that's the problem sometimes with modern Bible study, or the way we look at the Bible. It's like, if it's no longer good for salty of the earth. Well, what does it mean to be salty in Christian context? What do I have to do? If you just got this one verse out of nowhere, then you're left with a lot of questions. Well, how do I become salty? What does it mean to be a salty Christian? Okay? And I don't mean like,
Not
you
to be
know,
cruel.
yeah. It's like, that guy's salty. Okay, yeah. Well, remember the first 11 or 12 verses of this sermon have already told us what to do. He doesn't start with being the salt of the earth or having this distinctive quality. He already started with the Beatitudes, what it means to be blessed, what it means to be living as heirs of the kingdom, what it means to be a member of this kingdom and to live for his name. So we just need to go back and say, okay, he's telling me I am the salt of the earth, and what it means to have these distinctive qualities. Well, they're just right here. I have to be, poor in spirit. Wait, okay, now we go back and say, well, wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. He just said, blessed I am poor in spirit. I thought that meant that when I am poor in spirit, he'll be with me. Okay, but now it seems as if he's saying, if you want to be a Christian, if you want to be salted, then you need to do this. Then you need to be poor in spirit. That you need to mourn. That you need to be meek. That you need to hunger. Not just if it happens to you, I'll be with you. Not just if you happen to be in this certain predicament that I'll be with you, but that you should be in these, that you need to seek out these certain blessings or these certain things, that you need to be a peacemaker, that you should be pure in heart, that you should be persecuted for righteousness' sake, even though I just said don't seek out persecution. Okay, I stand by that. But we should.
When it calls for it, though.
But when it calls for
So
it,
it's like
that we
if
should stand. Yeah,
stand up.
we
for
should
it.
stand
If
up
you
in
see
that.
something, then it's like step in because God
Yes.
tells you to step in.
That's what I
Different.
meant. Yeah, having the courage to stand up, not to seek out revulsion, not to seek out persecution, but having the courage to stand up when the time calls for it. It's a fine line, but I think it's a line that's important. So I think then we say, okay, well, that's what it means to be salty. Now, any questions there before we move on?
I just want to clarify, because we're, not new, we're not really, but it just seems like the Woodlands Methodist Church in particular is like a missions-based church, right?
I would agree with that.
And
Yeah.
so, from our perspective, what we've seen is that, we go out seeking those who need Christ and then try to share that word with them. But in doing so, whether it's local or far, they're not necessarily in areas where Christ is already, I mean, Christ is everywhere, but on the mindset for these people, right? And so with that being us being the salt of the earth, I guess my question is, are we seeking persecution in that sense by going to these spots? Or is that just, we're going in the sense that, God is saying this is where we need to be, this is how we're gonna reference people because these are God's people, we need to seek them out and support them. He'll protect us in that, but in some aspects, you still are not really protected in that environment physically, because there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of discord. So then how does that fit into what we're talking about here? Of, sorry to.
No, that's a
I'm
good
just asking
question.
because
I was on the mission team here.
yeah.
So, you have to be called to go do that.
Right.
And so we support people that are called to go do that. And we go to mission, do missions, but safety is the number one priority for us. But people that know, and have that calling and have the spirit with them, we help support them to go do it, because it's not something we can do.
Right.
We don't have.
Not everyone.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good question, because like sometimes you got to go.
Yeah, sometimes you're just called.
It's just like, okay, well, and I'm going to go. And not that I'm seeking out. I think what I was trying to say is don't seek out persecution for persecution's sake, so that you may be rewarded for it.
Like a pride thing.
Yeah.
Versus a giving.
Right. And
A martyr, don't be a martyr.
yes, don't. And that's what I was trying to, I probably should have made that clearer. Sorry.
Sorry.
But no, I'm glad you brought it up, because it's misusing that scripture, saying, oh, the rewards are great for me, so I'm going to go seek out the persecution so that I can be persecuted, so that I will get the rewards that are great for me in heaven. That's the misuse of it. Whereas it's like, okay, I feel called to go to this place, or stand up for this injustice, or stand up for the name of Christ. I know that there will be persecution there, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I feel called to it, or I feel I have to do it for the sake of Jesus, not for the glory or for the rewards, but for the glory of the Father in heaven and for the name of Jesus Christ. I have to go do this, so I will, regardless of the persecution.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
similar to what you're saying too about like from past before, like, having a giving heart, right?
Yeah.
So
It's about the heart.
I can give money,
Yeah.
right? But if my heart's not in it, then is it really giving to God
Yeah.
what He wants?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And then Jesus is saying, so that when the persecution comes, don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Just rejoice. Yeah. And, I'll be with you because in heaven. Yeah. So now, being in that regards, being a light into the world, like missions work, or being a good example, Jesus is calling us to be a light. Now, Israel was called to be a light to the nations. And there was a light in the tabernacle representing the light of God to the world. God created light. But now, Jesus, shockingly, I think, is extending that call to his followers, to these randoms on a hillside. Okay? That's weird. Okay, that's wild. To think about as you look at the Torah and this light, that's the almighty voice of God speaking light, existence, matter, energy, time, and space into existence, and then saying, I want my light to be on a lampstand as the presence of the Almighty in the world. And then I'm going to call and set all these historical events into motion for this people to be a nation, to be my people. And then here's Jesus saying, like, okay, hey, all you farmers and fishermen, carpenters, beggars, women, children, that's you from now on. That's who you are. You're God's lampstand. You're that holy lampstand. You're the voice of God speaking light into existence. You're the nation of Israel. That's you. You're the light of the world. Now, that's what he's saying to ordinary, just random people, his followers. You're a city set on the hill. You're the light of the world. By the way, he also says that about himself. I am the light of the world. I've come to bring light into darkness. And now he's saying it to his people. And this city on a hill, he says, a city on a hill cannot be hidden, referring to Zion or to Jerusalem. And it's frequently referred to in the Old Testament, like in Isaiah 2, verses 2 through 3. In Isaiah, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the hills shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that we may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. This is kind of what I was saying about Jesus being Israel. So you can see like here, like Jerusalem is established, right? The law does come from Jerusalem. It is on the hill. But then when you read this, like what we just read of Jesus being that Israel, go to the mountain of the Lord, go up to the mountain to Jesus, the God of Jacob, and he may teach us his ways that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion, out of Israel, shall go forth the law and the word of the law from Jerusalem. Well, that's like saying that Jesus is that ultimate Zion. He is the ultimate Israel. He is that ultimate law. So there's kind of this like double meaning there. That's kind of what I think. But if you read it, maybe...
Well, he's like the pinnacle, right?
He's a
now at this
pinnacle.
point
Yeah.
in time.
It's that typology, right? That we keep talking about, that there's these types, that you see this like kind of pattern being established. It's like good, and then better, and then like best, being Jesus. And then like there's this ultimate Jerusalem at the end where, you know, there's this new heaven and new earth with Jesus on the throne, that sort of thing. So, but, and Jesus says, do not light your light. He says, you're the light of the world. You're a city on the hill, but don't let yourself be hidden. Let your light shine. It's one of my favorite songs from the 90s, right? You guys ever listen to Newsboys? Yeah, they're kind of in the news again. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that, hey, they may see your good works and give glory to your Father. Speak of missions works, okay. So that others may see your good works. Your good works are supposed to be seen. Why? So that those works can give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Our good examples and our good works need to be seen. Now, we're not showing off. They need to be seen. We do these things in public so that they can be seen, so that we can give glory to the Father in heaven. Okay? Now, Jesus also says in other places that we should do some things in secret as well. So that's fine too. Some things should be done in secret, and St. Paul also says sometimes the private things are the most important things, and that some things should be done behind, in secret, because no one needs to know, and those are the things that the Father loves the best. But Jesus here is saying that we need to show out sometimes so that we can give glory to the Father, not to ourselves. But our good works need to be seen. So that's kind of a hard thing to do sometimes for us. But that's why he gives us the first part, the blessed part first, the blessings, so that we have a right spirit. He doesn't say this, let yourself shine on a hill first, right? Because if he did that part first, what would that do? That'd give us a pretty big head, right? We're like, oh, I'm shining on the hill. Let's go. I can do that. That's easy for me. But first he says, oh, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger. Blessed are those who show mercy. Now that you know that, now that you have yourself in the right spiritual space, now go and do good works and show that these good works are for the glory of the Father in heaven, not for you, because you're merciful, you're pure in heart, you're meek, you're thirsting after righteousness. It's not for your own glory. You're not doing these things because you're all these other good things. It's for the glory of your Father in heaven. Good works lead to the others to glorify God. They say, look at these Christians. They're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it to glorify God. They're doing it because they love justice. They love kindness. They walk humbly, just like Micah tells us to do. Okay. Now, Jesus is reaffirming the Old Testament. He's not abolishing the Old Testament. He would never do that. He is reaffirming it, but he's fulfilling it. God's mission has always involved the people who live visibly and redemptively in the world. They've always had this covenant, but now Jesus is fulfilling the old covenant and making it more accessible than ever before. Instead of this lampstand that is shining in one place in Jerusalem, that's tended to by this priestly order, that's burning in one place, now it's in the heart of every believer that is in every nation on earth. It's been fulfilled in Jesus Christ and now is in all nations. And the Sermon on the Mount starts to reveal what kingdom living looks like. So not only has in the first 12 verses, Jesus says, what does a kingdom believer believe? What is the heart of the believer like? And now in 13 through 16, it's saying, okay, now what does the kingdom believer live like? Does that make sense to y'all? So
Say
he's
that
saying
again.
the first 12 verses are what is the heart of a believer like? What is the heart of a kingdom believer like? It's meek. It thirsts after righteousness. It's pure in spirit. It mourns. This is what the heart of a believer is like. But 13 through 16 is like, this is what the life of a believer is like. It's salty. It's covenant. It's distinctive, and it shines. It's the light of the Lord in the life of the world around it. In the world around it, it shines, and it glorifies God. So it says, this is what your heart looks like. Now this is what your life looks like. Isaiah 60. We've done a lot of Isaiah today, haven't we? Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. So with the light, we're just reflecting the light of Jesus Christ. That's the good news, is that it's not your light. That's the best news of all. It's not your light. It's the light that was there at the beginning of the universe when God said, let there be light. It's not our light that we're just the lamp stand. We're reflecting the light of Jesus Christ. You don't have to do it yourself. You just have to hold it up, right? This little light of mine, right? I will let it shine. It's, you're just holding a candle up, okay? You're just reflecting the light of Jesus. The glory of the Lord. It's the glory of the Lord, not your own glory. That is the really good news. You don't have to do it yourself, okay? So you're just preserving. You're the salt. You're not the meat. Does that make sense? Okay? You're just preserving the works of the Lord. So, any questions today?
That was a good last line.
Well, I wish I had thought of it.
It's better than taking up a salt slug.
Yeah.
Slug.
Well, this slug's the devil, so I don't know. That's how we fight back. Okay. Okay. Any questions today? Thank you guys for being here today. We'll finish up the Sermon on the Mount. I guess we got 2 more weeks. Sermon on the Mount? Yeah, 2 more weeks. All right. Well, thank you guys, and I'll see you soon. Okay? Get out a little early, beat the traffic today. Go home, watch the race.
Nice
See if Max
race.
Verstappen gets banned this week.